Chapter 2. I've had enough of Al Capone and friends. After my very, very irritating interrogation with Levi, we moved on to the next member, a redhead who went by Clarisse.
It says here that you're from a very well-off family. Very nice houses, lots of money, a few businesses. You even have a lodge in the Alps.
I stayed quiet and chose to just watch this time. Arguing with Levi had drained me emotionally and mentally.
Did you research? Did you, dear?
Clarisse asked nonchalantly, fucking around with her handcuffs in the same way that Levi had. Was this a gang thing they could all do? I bit the inside of my lip and watched her movements carefully. Despite performing the same action, she moved differently to Levi, smoother. She'd clearly gotten out of cuffs before. I decided not to let my mind wander into how she could break out of them easily, in fear that it would destroy my fragile mental health and send me into a padded cell. The constant clicking and tapping against the metal was irritating, and I could tell that it was bothering him.
Why'd you run away? I wouldn't have if my family were that rich.
Miller continued, ignoring what Clarisse had said beforehand. I frowned. Why was he baiting her? Was this an American thing? Baiting people to trap them into saying stuff they didn't mean? They certainly did it in all the court shows I'd watched.
Well, Agent...
Clarisse continued, seemingly unbothered by Miller's attempts to crack her facade.
Miller, while that might be you, not all of us are in it for the money. Are we, English lady? I do apologize that I don't know your name. Your partner has negated to tell me that information.
I frowned, desperately trying to search her face for any kind of giveaway that she wasn't batshit crazy. Agent Clarke. I answered her unspoken questions slowly, still trying to understand her persona. What do you mean, though? Clarisse's lips quirked at the edges.
You know what I mean.
Miller's gaze drilled into my neck. My family aren't in any way, shape or form rich. My mother has medical bills that my great-grandkids will be paying off. I deflected her attempt to make me out to be the bad guy. Clarisse hummed.
Maybe you're in the wrong job then, Agent Clarke.
I scoffed. Not really. The American healthcare system is a one-way system to a billionaire's pocket. Never mind those who need the help. Clarisse hummed again.
Tell me about it.
Clarke, can I have a word?
I sighed internally, but followed him dutifully. I didn't quite have the authority within my position to say, fuck off. The second the thick door was shut, and we were positioned in front of the two-way mirror, watching as Clarisse yet again fucked around in the room, not in the slightest bit bothered that she'd been arrested, Miller was already a joy.
What was that?
He hissed. I crossed my arms. What was what? He gestured to the room.
Did you go to high school together or some shit? You're FBI, she's criminal.
I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. She's also human and currently innocent, I argued.
Don't do that. You and I both know she's as guilty as the others.
He turned to face the glass, scowling. Honestly, when doesn't he scowl? I did roll my eyes this time. For sure. But, isn't the phrase innocent until proven guilty? Or is it different here? Miller side-eyed me.
I'm gonna nail 'em all.
I sighed quietly. Yes, but they're still human, and we have a code to follow. They're not murderers, sexual predators, or anything of the like. We've got no reason to treat them as anything but humans, I said.
At the end of the day, they're criminals, and criminals are criminals, no matter what they've done.
As he stormed back into the room, I sighed heavily to myself. But it is different, isn't it? I muttered to myself, quickly following in and slipping in before the door clicked shut.
Blake Gupta.
Miller sneered.
It says here that you're the unofficial lawyer.
Miller said in lieu of a greeting. Blake tipped his head slightly in agreement.
What exactly does that mean?
I took a sip of the American tea, wishing I brought my tea bags. I was desperately trying to pay attention, but my mind kept drifting to how the interrogation with Jack would go.
It means exactly what you think it means.
He folded his hands on the table.
I make sure they don't get into too much trouble. And when they do, I unofficially bail them out.
I raised my eyebrow. Does he have a more in-depth file that I can read? I asked Miller.
Yeah, but it's on the system. I'll get it for you when we're done.
I picked up the overview that Miller brought and began to read through it. It was scarily lacking in detail. How on earth Miller could confidently interview these people with such a lack of information beat me. I'd need far more than this. The paper said each person's name, their age, and what they were in for. Nothing personal, no previous convictions, no information on their robbery. I sighed quietly. The only major difference between the four people was their age. And, obviously their names, but that should go without saying.
Did you research?
I snapped out of my daze with a snort. Both men turned to me with very different expressions. One had clear annoyance, while the other sported confusion and interest. Don't mind me. I just find it amusing that he and Griffin said the same thing. Carry on, gentlemen, I smiled. Miller sighed deeply and turned away from me. Blake's face broke out into a troublemaking smirk, and he stared at me.
Is this a date?
He grinned, gesturing to us both. Miller began stuttering out an excuse, while I, the classy young lady that I am, gagged loudly at the thought. Miller looked mildly offended. Have a laugh? He's like twice my age, 3 times as ugly, and 4 times as rude. I wouldn't go out with him if he was the last man on earth, I snorted, listing his many unfavourable characteristics on my fingers. Miller began arguing with Blake again, and once again my thoughts drifted to Jack. It was just after my 15th birthday when he stopped visiting. The custody agreement said my siblings had to do a 6-month stay with each parent until they turned 16. Simon stopped at 16. Amy stopped at 16. Hell, Thomas stopped when he was 14. He claimed he was ill or busy. And my mum, the lovely lady that she was, didn't force him to. The only one I could count on was Jack. I would stay with my boyfriend, who lived a lot closer to the airport than I did, the night before Jack arrived, and I would track his flight until he landed. I'd be waiting at the gate for him to get off the plane, and I'd spend every waking moment with him up until he left for San Fran again. I was getting ready to come back from my visit to San Francisco shortly after I turned 15 when Jack said,
I don't think I'll be able to come this year, Ast.
As I've mentioned before, I only let my closest call me any form of my first name, Astrid. My thoughts screeched to a halt. Why? You come every year, I asked, feeling hurt.
I've just got lots of school stuff to sort out. I can come next year, though.
I smiled sadly and hugged him just before getting on the plane. Sure. Okay. But he never did come next year. Or ever again.
But you should know, she has a very big secret. One I'd argue that she doesn't even know yet.
Blake's annoying voice snapped me out of my mind. I frowned, acting like I'd been paying attention. I could feel Miller's gaze on my shoulders. I ignored him.
Like, this is your first time in the field, isn't it?
Blake looked way too smug. I stayed quiet. It wasn't hard to identify that I was fresh meat. Miller turned to watch me. It wasn't technically my first time in the field, but it was at the same time. I received my first off-the-desk mission when I was 18, shortly after MI5 had hired me. They needed someone to track down a massive drug lord who was luring his prey in to do his dirty work, such as buying and distributing drugs. When they'd fulfilled their purpose, he either sold them as sex slaves or killed them. Initially, the case had me aiming for the drug lord himself, but I suggested his son, who was only a few months older than me. It actually turned out to be a better idea. I had to act like a drug-addicted bimbo for a month, and to be honest, I'd rather poke my eyes out with shitty sticks than do it again. It was awful. I was in a ridiculous sort of skirt, if you could even call them that, and super tight crop tops. It went against everything I stood for. It also didn't help that his son then developed an actual thing for me. As part of it, I acted like I felt that way too. Of course, it worked. The problem was that his son turned out to be a nice guy, and I liked him back. So, I continued seeing him in private, away from my life in MI5. We dated for, I think, around a year, maybe 18 months.
Don't fool him into thinking you care and then leave him. I can tell that is a big trauma for him.
Blake continued as he turned to Miller. I followed Gupta's unnaturally piercing gaze.
School?
He paused, then clicked his tongue.
Ah, family. It's always family. I'm gonna guess ex-girlfriend cheated and left you for either a brother or a cousin.
Miller scoffed.
I'll give you one more try, since I'm in a good mood today.
I couldn't help the eyebrow raise. This was Miller in a good mood? Shit damn, I dread to think what he's like in a bad mood. I know I'm a real bitch. Blake faltered for a second.
Father?
He tried to regain control of the room, but it failed. Catching him off guard was the way to, well, catch him? Shut up, I'm tired.
No, my girlfriend, who I'd been with for 4 years, I hasten to add, cheated on me with my older sister.
Ouch. There is nothing worse for a man's pride than a woman who seeks the bed of another woman over his. Blake leaned back in his chair, picking at his nails.
In my defense, it's not easy to guess that he's that shitty a boyfriend to turn a woman lesbian. Wow.
Wow, that's harsh. I frowned slightly, watching Miller's expression. His asshole, almost guarded expression fell for a split second. I pointed at Blake. Hey, don't do that. We're just trying to do our jobs. I narrowed my eyes slightly. Blake shrugged innocently.
Do what?
I glared. You know what? We're just trying to get to the bottom of everything. There's no need to bring up stuff that happened years ago, all right? I kept firm. Blake huffed a laugh.
Sweetheart, in this business, you do what you can to protect yourself. If that means you dig up the past to hurt somebody, well, then they go home upset.
I bristled at being called sweetheart. Don't call me that, I spat.
That's enough. Both of you.
Blake hooed, smirking.
We're a bit snappy today, aren't we, Agent Miller?
I've had enough of Al Capone and friends. You can deal with your brother.
I frowned. Isn't it against policy for me to interview my brother? Or any family member? I asked quietly. Miller glared.
Do I look like I care?
I glared back.
I mean, I can deal with him, but you won't like the way I do it.
I scoffed. No, it's fine. I folded my arms. Asshat, I mumbled. First, we had lunch. Or rather, Miller did, while I read all their files from the laptop. Hey, it's asking me for a passcode. Put it in for me. I shoved the laptop over. Miller rolled his eyes, but did it anyway.
You're not a very patient person, are you, Agent Clarke?
I smiled and shook my head without looking up from the screen. Nope, I replied, popping the P. Not when I'm focused on something. He sighed but continued eating salad, I think. It was a plate full of green things and a singular slab of steak. Ugh, disgusting. Are there codes for them? I asked. Miller answered. I rolled my eyes. Is there a code to open the files? I asked slowly. Miller rolled his eyes as he continued to eat his leafy lunch.
Yeah, it's their date of birth, month, and year as numbers. But the right way. Month, day, year.
It's wrong, but I couldn't be asked to argue. Cheers, I mumbled, pressing Blake's file and entering the code. Blake Gupta, 48 years old, October 5th, 1966. Last known address, Broad Avenue, Naples, Florida. Mr. Gupta was last listed as a live-in resident in June 2007, but hasn't moved anywhere since. Likely homeless. Lived with Marie and Jackson Gupta. No other family members. Last job, telemarketer, 2004 to 2007. Quit for unknown reasons. Hasn't been employed since. Known convictions: bribery, insurance fraud, aggravated assault, probation violation, public intoxication, drug possession, DUI, robbery, embezzlement, tax evasion, telemarketing fraud, and theft. Has served/dealt with each charge. My eyes widened as I read through the report. Jesus Christ. I jotted down a few notes on this Blake before moving on to Clarisse, and God, hers was nearly as bad as his, despite being nearly 20 years younger. Clarisse Griffin, 30 years old, June 23rd, 1984. Last known address, Stewart Street, Los Angeles, California. Miss Griffin was last residing in her parents' house in 2006. She was removed by the LAPD after disorderly conduct. Family: Alison and Gary Griffin, parents; Zoe, Elizabeth, Gary Jr. and Christopher Griffin, siblings. Miss Griffin was reported in a few homeless shelters over 6 months in 2007. Likely homeless. Last job, teacher, 2005 to 2007. Fired for a criminal record. Known convictions: burglary, aiding and abetting, aggravated assault, conspiracy, probation violation, disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, robbery, fraud and theft. Has served/dealt with each charge. I sighed loudly and turned to Miller. Surely there's enough evidence here to lock them all up. These lists are huge.
Believe me, we want to. The trouble is, they've all served their charges or they've been cleared. There are no legal grounds to hold them anymore. He paused. Who have you read so far?
I shut down Clarisse's file and opened up Levi's. To be honest, I was expecting his to be far longer than it was, but he only had 7 charges. Blake and Clarisse. I'm just about to read Levi's and Jack's. If I wasn't looking, I'd have missed the way Miller's face changed when I mentioned my darling brother.
Oh, hurry up and read Jack's, as well, I say but you're due to speak to him in less than 5.
Levi McIntyre, 27 years old, February 3rd, 1987. Last known address, 172nd St. Fresh Meadows, Queens, New York. Mr. McIntyre was handed into CPS custody at the age of 6 by his mother, Kate, a known drug addict, and his father, George, a man with a history of domestic violence. Aside from his parents, no other family members are known. He was placed in several foster homes until the age of 16. See reverse side for addresses and names. Has been arrested in several states on various suspicions, but was released due to lack of evidence. Last job, mixologist, 2002 to 2006. Quit for personal reasons. Known convictions: bribery, aiding and abetting, assault, conspiracy, robbery, fraud and theft. Has served/dealt with each charge. I took a deep breath in and opened Jack's file. Jackson Clarke, 23 years old, June 12, 1991. Last known address, Sloat Boulevard, San Francisco, California. Mr. Clarke was living with his father, Alex Clarke, in 2010, but moved out at the age of 19. Has no known address. Had British American citizenship. Family members: Avalon and Alex Clarke, parents, banker and builder respectively. Simon, Amy, Thomas and Astrid Clarke, siblings. Shop manager, doctor, biochemist and FBI agent respectively. Last job, shop assistant, 2008 to 2011. Fired for unknown reasons. Known convictions: burglary, bribery, aiding and abetting, vandalism, robbery, shoplifting, extortion, fraud and theft. Has served/dealt with each charge. Jack was asleep when we walked in. Of course he was. That was all he ever did when we had our visits. I sat in my chair silently. He eventually opened his eyes with a lazy grin.
I assume by the tired look you've already spoken to either Levi, Blake, or both?
He taunted, closing his eyes again. Both, I replied. I kept my voice monotone. Jack jumped in his seat with his eyes wide. I leaned back into my chair and plastered a lazy smirk on. Hello, brother. Jack's eyes darted between my face and my 3 badges. One on each shoulder and one on my breast.
Since when were you FBI? You're only 22.
He exclaimed. I could see Miller watching the exchange with wary eyes. Well, if you'd bothered to check in with me in the last 6 years, you know a hell of a lot more. But you didn't, and you don't. I watched his expression sour as he looked down. Boo-hoo, I mocked. Jack's face hardened.
Jack Clarke, 22 years old, national American citizen. Had dual British-American citizenship, but changed it 5 years ago to single citizenship in the USA. Born and raised in San Francisco, California. Partly lived in Cambridge in the UK for 6 months a year for 15 years. When you changed your citizenship. Now, why was that?
Miller read from his overview. My head snapped to Jack's, who looked away guiltily. You changed to single citizenship? Why? I asked. I felt like crying. Why would he do this?
Because
Jack began. Rage overtook my body. Because you had no intention of coming back, did you? I sneered. Jack didn't answer me. I scoffed and stood up, desperately trying to stop the tears from rolling down. I'm out. I can't interrogate him. Without waiting for an answer, I forcefully slammed my chair back onto the metal desk and stormed out of the room, letting the door slam shut behind me.
Clarke, what the hell was that?
Were Miller's first words when he found me sitting outside the FBI center, watching the rush of New York. I didn't answer him. I took a long gulp of my still slightly too hot chocolate.
Hey, I asked you a question.
Miller shouted. I shrugged. I heard you, I replied. I could practically hear his ears whistling.
Then why didn't you answer me?
He seethed behind me. I'm not in your interrogation room. I don't have to answer anything, I said as I stood up and faced him.
You've been crying,
he stated. I rolled my eyes and sniffed, wiping my nose. Yeah, well you would be as well when you find out your sibling that you were super close to stopped visiting you, and he changed his citizenship to single again. Miller was silent. I turned back around and dropped my now empty cup into the bin next to me.
Where are you staying?
He asked. I'm going to catch a flight back to San Fran. My apartment is finally finished. I just need to grab the keys, so I'm going to drive to their next hit, I said, quoting the word. I was already dreading the long journey. Google estimates 20 hours, and that was without any pit stops.
Wait, hit? They're going to rob another store?
Miller asked. I rolled my eyes. You aren't very attentive, are you, Miller? His eyes narrowed. When they walked in, something fell out of Levi's pocket. I saw it on CCTV, so I went and looked at it. It looked like a receipt or a to-do list. It's got loads of jewelry chain headquarters listed, with the addresses and CEO. It's quite unnerving, to be honest. Miller looked like he was going to strangle me.
You didn't tell me this? Why the hell are we letting them go, then?
Because there's no DNA evidence that they've actually done it. The only proof so far is the list, and that's pretty ambiguous. Miller sighed loudly, pinching his nose.
Where are they going next?
I pulled out my phone to show him the blurry screenshot from the CCTV footage. From the looks of it, Miami. I'll see if I can get access to the footage again to get the address. Whatever they're doing is going to happen on Saturday night. Saturday was only 3 days away, so I had to get my ass moving.
Okay. Does that address sound familiar?
Miller scratched his head in irritation. No. Maybe clothing? Or electronics? I asked, spitballing. Miller raised his eyebrows. I shrugged. I don't know, man. I'm not a criminal, I exclaimed. Miller scoffed and rolled his eyes.
How are you getting there?
He asked instead, turning the conversation back. I'm going to drive. I have a friend who lives in Jacksonville. I said I'd drop his sister off on the way through. Miller opened his mouth to speak, but I cut across. We're going to take it in turns driving before you ask. I answered the unspoken question. I've got a flight for San Francisco booked in 4 hours, though, so I need to be going, I said.
Hang on. That's like a 20-hour drive. You can't do that.
Miller exclaimed as if I was stupid. I know that. That's why I'm setting off tomorrow. I've booked a one-night stay in a few places. Miller didn't look convinced, and I have to admit, it was nice to have a somewhat concerned person for me. Don't get me wrong, I have my mum, aunt, cousin and friend, but they're all busy. My mum had a nervous breakdown and can just about look after herself. My aunt is worrying about my mum. My cousin lives in New Jersey and my friends show concern like friends do. The concern Miller was showing me was like brotherly concern, and I'm not afraid to say that I lapped it up. Even when my brothers visited, they never really cared for me. In all honesty, if I wasn't born, my parents probably would have stayed together. That's a lovely thought for a teenager to have, by the way. Really solidified the typical teenage feelings of the world hating you. If you want, I'll send you my guesstimates of when I'll be and where, I said, smiling gently. Miller dismissed it with his usual grunt, but I could see in his eyes that he would appreciate it. So, as soon as I got back to San Fran and picked up Nicola, my mate's sister, I finalised my routes to Miami. Luckily, there was an apartment left open to stay in on the day they'd supposedly be there. I have no idea why it was so busy, but I think it had something to do with something called spring break. I don't know. We didn't have anything like that back in England. I mean, the closest we had was prom and term breaks, but I guess that's it. Could I trust that they'd be there? No. If I were a criminal, I'd absolutely make a fake thing to throw the police off long enough for them to check and wait in the location before moving on. I'd then go to the location and do what I was going to do, having a relatively likely chance that I wouldn't be caught. Why go back and check a place that they'd already checked? That's like looking for a shoe in a place that you've already looked in. It's not going to magically appear now, is it? Not that I'd ever thought about it, of course. We planned to hit it in runs of 3 hours each. The run to Jacksonville would take just over 14 hours, so I'd do the first 3 hours, then rest while Nicola did the next 3 hours, and so on. Once I dropped her off at her brother's house, I'd make the final run to Miami, which would take just under 5 hours, which isn't too bad. Way longer than I'd ever driven in one stint back home in the UK, but that's America for you. I didn't mind though. If I left tomorrow morning by 9, we'd be in Jacksonville by 12 on Friday, including the inevitable pit stops along the way. Then I'd stay for a few hours just to rest and have some decent home-cooked food and set off again. Once I finally hit Miami, I could freshen up a bit and have a day to sort myself out before throwing myself into the FBI again. Great.